Hello, good afternoon, everyone. People starting interacting in the chat. Fantastic to see that. Please tell us where you are from. We always have people from all over the world. Thanks for coming. Tell us where you are in Brazil. Mexico, Egypt, Espírito Santo, Iran, Belo Horizonte, present, Uruguay, Campinas. Excellent to have you all here today. Very brave teachers on a Friday afternoon. Sete Lagoas. Well done. So let's start. Welcome again. I'm Katia Valley, Schools and Exams Marketing Manager at Cambridge University Press. Thanks for coming for today's webinar, which is going to be about helping teens learn to learn and enjoy the process with our speaker, Denise Santos, who is one of Game Changer authors, our brand new series for teenagers. Let me tell you a little bit about Denise. Denise has been working in ELT for more than 30 years. She has taught English in Brazilian schools and language schools at all levels and for all age groups. She has also taught applied linguistics and related subjects at undergraduate and postgraduate level in the UK. Denise has published widely in the field. Her publications include textbooks, books for teachers, and for the general public, as well as a large number of academic publications. Denise was born in Rio de Janeiro. She is a carioca, but she lives in the UK. Before I pass the floor to Denise, I would just want to tell you a little bit about our housekeeping for today's webinar. We are recording this session, and the recording will be available for you in our channel in YouTube, Cambridge Brazil YouTube channel next week. You will also have a certificate by the end of this presentation. Please take a look at our chat. There will be a link for you to send us feedback and get your certificate. Let's keep the questions to Denise to the end of the presentation, and please use the Q&A tool here in this platform. We will be monitoring and taking a look at your questions. I believe this is all I have to say, and without further ado, hello Denise, welcome to today's webinar.
Hello, can you hear me well, everyone? Yes.
Can you confirm in the chat? Yes.
Lovely, lovely.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much
for accepting our invitation. So the floor is yours, Denise. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for the invitation, Katia, Cambridge University Press, to be able to be here with you today. Also thank the audience for being here. So I'm really impressed, while you were saying hello, I wrote down Brazil, Egypt, Peru, Ecuador, Mexico, Iran, Scotland, Morocco, Argentina. So it's a wide range of countries all around the world. So it's really, really very exciting to be able to talk to you all. So thank you very much. So let's start. There's lots of things for us to do today. I've prepared lots of things for us to do tonight, this afternoon for many of you. So before we start, there are a couple of things that I'd like to tell you that might help you make the most of the session today. The first one is that I'll be inviting the audience to to share their thoughts, to answer some questions all through the session. So please, when there is a question and when there is an invitation to use the chat box, please write down what your thoughts are, what your ideas, your experience, everything, what you want to talk about, because that will help me a lot to decide how to keep going. Okay, some of the things I'll be able to answer or to explore a bit further. Some others I won't be able. If there's something that you've said that I haven't given any follow-up to, please get in touch with me later. In the last slide, I'll share my contact details. So that's one thing. Another thing I'd like to say before we start, if you happen to have a device with that allows you to take photos and to scan QR codes, please have it at hand. It might be useful because I'll be in some of the slides. There are some QR codes that you might want to follow up, and with the camera, it will be easier. Okay, so this is what I have for you for now, so let's move on. This is how the talk is going to be organized tonight, this afternoon, today. We'll start with some definitions: learning to learn, what is learning to learn, and why it is important to learn. And because we'll be focusing on teenagers, we'll talk a little bit about some characteristics that describe developmental issues, behavior issues that are common to many teenagers. So I think it's important for us to talk about learning to learn, but keeping in mind that we are thinking about how to do this work with our teenage students. And then we'll explore some materials for teaching teenagers learn to learn. Specifically, it's Game Changer, the series that Katja has just mentioned. And we'll have a look at how we can teach learning to learn in practice with these activities in more practical ways. And this is where the bulk of the webinar is going to be in this final part. Lots of activities, lots of ideas of how to explore these activities. So I want to spend most of the time there. But theory is important, definitions are incredibly important. So we'll start by looking at these things. So let's start. Learning to learn. Now I throw the ball to you. What do you think that is? So jot down some ideas. At this moment, there is no right or wrong answer. Just what you think learning to learn involves. If you think about, for example, teaching learning to learn, what sorts of activities, what sorts of skills are we talking about? Some ideas. Who's the brave one? Going to be the first one to kick the first ball. Learning to learn. What's the first thing that comes to your mind? Autonomy. Yeah. Anything else? Why is it important to learn to learn? So we have the notion of autonomy. Anything else? Any key concepts? Any key teaching skills? Take control of the learning process, be active in the process of learning, be independent. All these things are very important. That's lovely, everybody. Yeah, keep going, keep the ideas coming. Enjoy the activities, finding a way to learn in a better way, improve. All these elements, all these actions, all these ideas are super relevant, aren't they? So, manage information, have interest, finding your own method. All these things are very important. So now I have another invitation to sort of propose to you. Keep a record. It could be a mental record or a written record of your ideas at the moment, right? What you think learning to learn is. So either write them down or keep them in your mind. And at the end of this talk, go back to your ideas and try to think about what you wrote and try to assess whether your thoughts, your ideas have changed in any way. And this is a bit of a meta talk. This is talk about the talk to explain what I'm doing here. What I'm doing here is actually a strategy for learning to learn. It's a strategy to become an autonomous learner. And why is that? Because you have an idea at the moment, you are going to listen about this topic for the next 50 minutes. And after these 50 minutes, your ideas might change. You might see something slightly differently. You might think, oh, this thing was not totally correct, let's say, or this thing was not totally appropriate. I have to change this idea a little bit. So keep a record of your ideas, right? And go back to them at the end of the session. And this is an invitation for you. It's a possible way for you to learn as well about learning to learn, if that makes sense, okay? So let's move on. So I'll propose two definitions to you. The first definition comes from Cambridge, just move from Cambridge Life Competencies Framework. Some of you may be familiar with this framework. Some of you may not be familiar with the framework. The QR code there actually takes you to the site where you can read more about these competencies. So basically what Cambridge has done is to outline 6 competencies which they think are important, are essential for all of us today, right? So there are 6 competencies, and they are social responsibility, communication, communication, social collaboration, creative thinking, critical thinking, and learning to learn. Learning to learn is one of these competencies, and it's it's our topic today. It's our focus today. And according to this framework, and let's have a look at the definition, learning to learn involves the following. Let's read it together. Learners develop practical skills to support and take control of their learning and reflect on their own progress. So as you can see, lots of elements that you have already mentioned are present in this definition, isn't it? We talked about taking control of their learning. There's this notion of reflection, self-assessing, reflecting on progress, right? So let me give you an example of what this competency might be before we actually explore the keywords inside this this definition. Let me give you an example. Suppose you are a learner, you are a learner at early steps, learning English, and you've learned the word top in class, and you know that top is something that has to do with a higher position of something. So that's the top of the shelf, or the top of something. This meaning of top. Then you start reading a book, you start reading a story, and there's a dialogue, and somebody says, oh, I like your top. And then you think, well, that doesn't really make sense. What is this person talking about? Does this person like my top? Is it the top of my head? That's the higher bit of my body. Is it the top of my head? That doesn't make sense. So you go to the dictionary. So you develop skills to look up words in the dictionary and find the meaning that you're looking out for. So you read the definitions, and you have this definition of the higher position, which doesn't really make sense. And there is another definition for top, a toy, and you go like, it doesn't make sense because there is no toy in this situation. And then there is another definition that has to do, with clothes, your top, your shirt, your blouse. Oh, that makes sense. So this is what the person is talking about. The person is talking about the top, clothes, not a toy, not a higher position, but talking about clothes. So this is learning to learn. Is the ability, in this case, to look up words in the dictionary and to make a decision of whether, is this concept the one I'm looking for? No, that doesn't make sense. Does this one make sense? Yes, that makes sense. So as you can see, the key words here are skills. So learning to learn involves skills. It's not talent. It's not something we are born with, it's something that we can learn. They are skills. And if they are skills, they are teachable and they are learnable. So they're skills. And these skills, their objective is for learners to take control of their learning. So we're talking about control, autonomy. Autonomy could be a synonym here, isn't it? and also reflection on their own progress. So I'll share with you this scheme here, which I've created for this presentation. I think that if we're going to talk about learning to learn, we have to see learning to learn not only as action, not only the things we do, but also reflection. There must be an element of reflection about the action, so that I can think, was my action accurate? Did my action lead me to where I wanted it to lead? And then this reflection will take you to novel actions that will then require new reflections. Does that make sense? Yes, no? Because this is very important. This is actually the base for what we are going to develop throughout this talk. Learning to learn involves skills that will be translated into actions, but we also need to think about these actions. We need to reflect about them so that the new actions will be even more accurate or more appropriate, okay? Because we have to keep on learning. It's a cycle, it never stops. Okay, let's then move on to another definition. This one is the definition proposed in the Base Nacional Comum Curricular, the BNCC, which is the document orienting Brazilian education these days. So it's the document that provides the guidelines for what is essential learning in compulsory education in Brazil. And this document outlines education around 10 competencies. So there are 10 competencies. We're not going to talk about all of them today. This is not our focus today, but we're going to talk about one of the competencies listed in the document, which is actually the first one. It's competency number 1, which says the following. So this is something we need to develop with our students. Our students, learners, they need to value and use knowledge historically constructed about the physical, social, cultural, and digital world in order to understand and explain our reality, to keep on learning, and to collaborate for the construction of a just, democratic, and inclusive society. So, lots of complicated words, isn't it? So let's try to unpack this competency a little bit to see how learning to learn, which is this keep on learning, resides, how it belongs in this description, in the description of this competency, and to see what keywords are there as well. And let's talk a little bit about this. So basically, the document is telling us that students need to develop knowledge. So knowledge is important, isn't it? But learners need to value and use this knowledge to understand and explain our reality. In other words, to make sense of the world, And we know that things around us are always changing, always moving, always evolving. So it's something that needs to be in constant change in many ways. So that's why keeping on learning is so important, because we have to keep up with all the changes and all the new things that we have to address in daily life. But we have to do these things in order to collaborate for the construction of a just, democratic, and inclusive society. So in other words, everything we do is basically for us to be active, responsible citizens, local citizens, global citizens. So do you agree with me that there's also an element of action and reflection in this definition? I think there is, because if you look at the final part, this construction of a just and democratic and inclusive society, this is action, isn't it? This is our action. But also that when we talk about understanding and explaining our reality, this is strong cognitive work, isn't it? We are thinking about how can I make sense of my world. So we are reflecting about everything we do, and keeping on learning to try and make sense of this world, and trying to be able to help construct this world, which is more just, more democratic, and more inclusive, right? So these two definitions, they very much address this notion of action and reflection. And this is a theme, like I said, that we are going to go back to quite often in this presentation. Before we move on to more practical stuff, I'd like to tell you a little story. So I show you this picture of a young man, and I'd like to ask you 3 questions. When do you think this photo was, when and where do you think this photo was taken? So a place and a date, and what is this person wearing? What do you think this person is wearing? So some guesses, when and where? Any guesses? And what is this person wearing? Come on, everyone. When, let's start with one question then. When was this photo taken? Right, my uniform. What type of uniform? Uniform, what type of uniform? Military uniform? Where do you think this photo was taken? We have some dates, 30s, 40s, 50s, Spain, 40s, in the 50s, okay, Spain, 40s, okay, the 20s, college uniform, looks giant, it does, doesn't it? I thought the same when I saw the photo. Yes, okay, so let me give you the answers to my questions. This photo was taken in Rio, Brazil, in the 1930s. This is a teenager wearing his school uniform, which, and you're right, it's a military uniform because this person used to go to a military school. It was high school, right? Okay, so let's move forward 90 years. I said 90, that's 90. Move forward 90 years, and this is the person. This is the person today. This person is actually my father, who celebrated his 99th birthday a couple of days ago. So he's in good shape, in good form, and that's him. In the 1930s, with his school uniform, it was a military school that he attended in Rio. Now, the story about my father I want to tell you is that a couple of years ago, he told me accidentally, incidentally, that he was writing this guide. He was writing a guide. It was a guide that he called, the word in Portuguese, I'm going to say the word in Portuguese for those who understand it, then I'll translate. He said it was roteiro de autoaprendizagem, which in English would roughly translate as something like a guide of self-relearning. So it's all very complicated. It's something to the self, it's relearning. And basically what he told me was that he felt that he hadn't learned things properly, which isn't true, because my father was a very successful professional in his lifetime. He was one of the greatest civil engineers of his generation. So he did learn a lot, but he feels that he hasn't learned things properly. And now in his 90s, his pastime is to sit down with mathematics books, physics books, chemistry books, and read these books, trying to self-relearn the things he thinks he didn't learn properly. So I was very curious about this guide, obviously being a teacher, and this is so much about, learning to learn, which is a topic really at my heart. And then his guide basically goes the reader through these 11 steps. According to his guide, to self-relearn something, and this is what he does every day, can you believe it? He finds 2 or 3 sources about a concept, and then he tries to understand the definitions of these concepts. He memorizes these definitions, tries to remember them, and then he tries to apply these definitions and these concepts in more practical activities. A couple of days later, he goes back to all the sources, he revises everything he's done, he takes notes, he analyzes the previous stages, and he practices more with more practical stuff. He draws some conclusions, he reflects about them, and then he moves forward to a new concept when he feels he's satisfied with his self relearning. Can you believe it? This is what he does at age 99. Now, interestingly enough, we can see these elements of action and reaction clearly in this guide, can't we? So lots of action and lots of reflection as well, this stopping and thinking and going back. The number 10 is reflection. So it's there all the time. And now, my question to you is, do you think he learned to learn in his life? Yes or no? He did, yeah, I think he did. Even if it is something very scientific, very mathematical, very cognitive, he did, because that's what he's interested in. And my point is, you can be thinking at the moment, why am I saying this? Why am I bringing this? Because this, to a certain extent, contradicts what we've been saying, contradicts the fact that we've been saying that we need to teach learners to learn, because in a sense, he didn't learn to learn in school. You will agree with me. He didn't have this sort of practice at school. At his time, his schooling was very much content-based, content-oriented. He learned content. He didn't learn to learn. He didn't learn to learn at school. This is something he did on his own, right? So some people will be able to do that on his own. But what I think, and I don't know if you'll agree with me, please tell me if you do or if you don't. What I think is that most people don't learn to do this kind of thinking on their own. Most people will need some guidance to reach a stage where they will be able to do something like this. In the situation we live today, our world, the complexities we deal with today, poverty, migration, climate change, lack of resources, prejudice, racism, so many others, all these complexities, they've become so big. And now we can't afford to leave just a minority of people being able to learn. Right now, more than ever, we need to make sure that everybody, every single student, every single child, every single teenager we have in class, all of them learn to learn for the survival of the planet, for the survival of the species, if you like, right? So I think this is serious stuff, and we need to do that systematically with everybody, given the seriousness of the things we face today. Okay, so let's move to teenagers. When I talk about teenagers, first word that comes to your mind. First word. That can be a good thing, isn't it? That can be a good thing. We're talking about non-conformity. Non-conformity sometimes can be a good thing to change the status quo, isn't it? Too much, of course not. Problems, hormones. Yeah. So all these things. If you teach teenagers, and I have taught teenagers for many years of my life, they can be challenging, they can be difficult, but they can be creative, they can be stimulating, they can be great companions, they can be great learners if you manage to involve them and if you manage to bring them to your learning mentality, if you like, right? So we don't have time to talk much about teenage psychology, cognition, everything else, but there are some things I'd like to stress today so that we can go back to when we talk about our activities. Teenagers are teenagers. So that's one thing we cannot forget. They are not children and they are not adults. Although they want to be treated as adults, they are not there yet. They are still teenagers. There's lots of development still going on. They can do things more independently. They want to do things independently, but they need some guidance. They are still teenagers. We cannot forget that. They want to belong to a group. The search for belongingness in a group is very strong in teenagers. All of us want to do that, but I think at our teenage years, this is really very strong. And at a more superficial level, I think we can say that teenagers often like technology, games, and music. So I'll be bringing these ideas to you throughout, for the remainder part of this talk. This is our icon for support when we talk about bringing the notion of supporting teenagers. So this is our icon. We'll be talking about the notion of belonging in a group. This is the icon: technology, games, and music. Okay, so let's move on to our more practical stuff. Game Changer. Game Changer is a textbook series that I'm very, very proud to be part of. So I'm one of the authors, as Katja said, but Game Changer is actually the result of, a team effort of people all over the world. At the time I was writing, I was interacting with people in Brazil, in England, in Spain, in France. So it was really, really, really very interesting to see all of us from different parts of the world trying to give the best we have in order to produce this series that really wants to help teenagers to change the game, to behave responsibly, become responsible citizens, critical thinkers, and lifelong learners, because this is what we are talking about today, isn't it? We are talking about learning to learn. So let's look at some more practical ideas. When we talk about learning to learn, we probably think learning to learn what? In this talk, we're going to focus on these areas: learning to learn grammar, learning to learn vocabulary, learning to learn pronunciation, learning to learn knowledge, world knowledge, and learning to learn about oneself as a learner. So this is something I think it's very important. We need to help our students to learn what they are like as learners, because if I understand how I learn best, then I can learn better, right? Do you agree with me? People learn in different ways, but we need to understand how I learn, how you learn, so that we can learn better, right? Okay, so let's start looking at learning to learn grammar. So let me give you some background information here. This is a reading page. So just going back a little bit, in Game Changer, the grammar is extracted from text, right? From the reading. So this is a lesson. This is a reading lesson. So a very conventional reading lesson. The students will be asked to read a text, answer some comprehension questions, and then they will work on grammar. So before we talk about the specific grammar related to this reading, I'll give you some time to skim through the text. So as you can see, it's a blog post about unusual towns, right? So very short snippets of information, if you like, about two towns, one in Alaska called Whittier. And what is unusual about this town is that there is only one building in this town and all the residents live in the same building. The second town, the second unusual town is Thames Town in China. So if you look at the photo, the town looks very British, very English, if you like, isn't it? But it's not in England, it's in China, and basically this town replicates several monuments and the architecture and everything else from English towns, and it's called Thames Town in China. What do you think the grammar focus is? Just skimming through the text, and we're talking about description, towns. What do you think the grammar focus is? Any guesses? So there to be, present or past, do you think? Present simple, so in the present. So it's description, isn't it? There to be, there are, basically. So this is the next page. This is the next page. This is the page where students will infer part of the grammar. The approach taken in the series is an inductive, but it's inductive with support, with guidance. So basically, look at exercise 1. The students are given a chart, a table, with the structure in focus. There is, there are. And in the columns, you have examples: affirmative in the first column, negative in the second column, then yes, no questions in the third, singular and plural, and then short answers for the singular bit and for the plural bit. And notice that there are some blanks here. And what does the student have to do? The student have to go back to the text and find a sentence, find an excerpt from the text that will complete the sentence here with an example for the chart. So basically, the answer will be, there isn't a mall in Whittier. There isn't, because there's only one building and everything is in the same building. So there isn't a mall. And likewise, here, students will write, there are red telephone boxes, so affirmative, plural, an example they find in the text. So students are learning to learn the grammar through observation, through noticing, and then there will be some guidance here, still at exercise 2. They have to read these questions and answer them with correct short answers. So basically, they will be using the options here. Some guidance here also to complete the sentences, either affirmative or negative, using there is or there are in the affirmative or the negative. So now they have to think, is this sentence in the affirmative, in the negative? Is this singular, in plural? So, and they have to complete the answers. So lots of actions. So they have to complete, they have to answer, complete charts, complete answer questions, complete a sentence. So lots of actions in our model of action and reflection. But there is also an element of reflection here in this box. Let's have a look at this box. It's a look box where we can read. Remember, we don't use the verb have. We use there is or there's for singular nouns, and we use there are for plural nouns. Examples: there is a mall, there are 2 malls in my neighborhoods. Why do you think this box is there? Why do you think did we feel when we developed, this page, this project, that it was important to have a box like that when we talked about this particular topic? For students to understand the structures, to support weak students, to give an introduction. Yes, all of this is true. But look, when we say we don't use the verb have, this observation is there because in Brazil, exactly, Portuguese speakers will tend to use the verb have, because this is what Portuguese speakers use when they want to describe what there is or there are in a particular place. So basically, what I think is fantastic about this series, well, there are many fantastic things, but this is something that I really thought was really, really awesome. When we wrote Game Changer, we had access to a corpus of errors made by Portuguese speakers in Cambridge tests, so that we could know exactly what difficulties were for these particular learners and what we needed to focus on when we developed the grammar, especially the grammar bits of the course. So this is something that Brazilian learners will often make mistakes with, exactly. And then we put this box in to help students reflect on their potential problems. So as you can see in this activity, so this is just to highlight the areas we talked about. As you can see on this page here, there is support. So we're supporting teenagers to make conclusions about grammar, right? And my argument is, if we address these issues, the support, the presence of technology, the presence of games, the presence of music, and the emphasis on group work. My argument is, if we emphasize these things, if we bring these things often, will involve students better, and they will enjoy this process of learning to learn, right? So there is support here. Let me ask you, can we bring in an element of music, maybe with some technology as well? Can we bring music and technology to teach there is, there are to students? Well, I'll give you an idea. I think we can use apps that provide, for example, beats, music, background music ready to join lyrics. We could ask students to make some raps, to write some raps, some simple verses about this rule, let's say, and then they could produce this music with apps like GarageBand or something, and then they could share their raps, they could share their music to their friends, so that everybody could sing together. So this one would be about there is, there are. The next one would be about something else that they have problems with. And we could have things like, so pardon my singing, pardon my, my attempt to do a rap here, which is not my strength at all. But it could be something like this, we could have something like, don't say have, don't say have, say there is, there are, say there is, there are, there's a car, there's a factory, there are beaches, say there is, there are. So we can have things like this, record them, students listen to these raps and they sing them, and they will maybe absorb, internalize these rules better. So we're bringing music to teach something which is very technical, very, factual, but they can make music about this, which I think somebody's laughing. Yes, you're laughing at me. That's fine. That's fine. I am prepared. I was prepared for this. So no problem at all. Yeah, but I do think, if students could do, and they can manipulate these apps so well, and it will be great fun, and everybody will learn with the experience, right? Okay, so let's move on. Let's have a look at vocabulary. In Game Changer, vocabulary start in a dedicated section. It's a double page, so students are introduced to the vocabulary in context, and then there's lots of activities that they can work with. And in every unit, we propose a way of categorizing, of sorting, of categorizing vocabulary. And in every unit, we propose a different way. So in a unit, we may propose something like a mind map. In another unit, we may propose something like writing lists. For example, irregular verbs, regular verbs. There can be an activity where students are asked to label photos or to sort vocabulary. For example, in a unit about the environment, they would sort vocabulary, things that are good for the environment, things that are bad for the environment, this sort of stuff. The idea here is that we are providing students with a repertoire of vocabulary strategies that they can hear about, that they can act with, so they would have to use it, and then they would reflect on these activities to see which ones work or works best for them. I particularly like this activity. So have a look. The verbs they had learned in this unit were decide, laugh, remember, rush, shout, tell, walk, and want. So as you can see, these are all very, they are verbs, but all scattered verbs, difficult to categorize them in a particular way. So the solution in this unit was to propose this activity. They would have to complete this chart with the verbs by thinking about things we do with our brain, things we do with our mouth, and things we do with our legs, right? So for example, decide. What do I use to decide? I use my brain, isn't it? So I would write decide in that column. Laugh. I use my mouth, isn't it? So students would complete this chart, but have a look at the second part of the rubric of the exercise. Then add other verbs to the chart. So we are not only asking students to complete something which is already predefined, but we're also asking them to use what they already know, their prior knowledge, or even perhaps to look up new verbs in the dictionary as well, isn't it? So we are giving strategies for students to learn. Going back to our icons, there's some support here because we are supporting students in this process. But if we want to add an element of group bonding to this activity, what could we do? One possibility, for example, would be to invite students to move around the class and to try and find a new verb or new verbs that other students, that partners, classmates had written, and also to make sure that they could teach their friends something new as well. So the idea behind this possibility would be to encourage students to see themselves as teachers themselves, and to create this feeling, oh, I can learn with my friend, I can learn from my friend, and I can teach my other friend. It's this creation of a community of learners which would foster this sense of group bonding, in my opinion. So we could do that. Let's have a look at pronunciation. Yes, okay, so another 5 minutes. Learning to learn pronunciation. In every unit in the speaking section, there is work on pronunciation, and there's always a box like this one where we invite students to listen to something and to pay attention to how something is pronounced. So in this example, we are asking students to pay attention to the pronunciation of ed. So he worked, he liked, he started, he boarded, he traveled, he arrived. And the theory behind this idea, this activity, as you may know, is the notion of noticing, proposed by the applied linguist Richard Smith in the 1990s, according to which in foreign language learning, in order to learn something, we have to notice something first. This noticing can be spontaneous, can be unguided. I can notice something by myself, but it can also be guided. So we as teachers might help students notice something. So in this exercise is an example, and this other exercise is another example. They can notice intonation as well. So they would hear these questions and they would be encouraged to notice the intonation, and they would notice that in the WH question, the intonation goes down, where are you? And in the yes, no question, the intonation will go up. Are you okay? Right? So we would be inviting students to do this. So according to our taxonomy of icons of addressing teenage interests and development, this is support. By asking students to notice something, we are supporting them, we are scaffolding them, we are guiding them to notice that. And my question now is, could we perhaps add an element of gamification together with some group bonding here? Could we do some games here? What could we do? We could do all sorts of different things. Something very simple that I thought of to share in this presentation would be, for example, to ask each student to write a sentence, thinking about here the sentences in the past, the verbs in the past. Each student would write a sentence using a regular verb in the past. They would write their names together with the sentence. So all of these would be in slips of paper. So I write my sentence. I visited my friend, Denise, right? So put my little piece of paper in a bag. Everybody would do that, pieces of paper in the bag. Then I would divide the class in groups. Everybody would pick one of the sentences, would have to read out the sentence, and the rest of the class would have to judge if the pronunciation is right or if it's not right. If it's right, you score a point. If it's not right, you don't score a point. So in this case, we have this notion of, of games and competition and scoring, and we have this group bonding because there are groups, isn't it? So in the groups, people would be encouraged to help the friend in the group who was responsible for reading out the sentence in a correct way. So we could do that in a very mechanical, in a very technical exercise. Okay, learning to learn world knowledge. In Game Changer, in every unit, accompanying a reading section section that would either be something related to culture or something related to CLIL, there is a web quest, which is an invitation for students to research a topic in a very straightforward way. So the research would involve a yes or a no question or a true or false response, as in this example. So this is a unit about, this is a reading about the art of storytelling that starts with cave paintings, prehistoric cave paintings. And then the web quest invites students to research whether the statement is true or false. There are prehistoric cave paintings in Piauí, Brazil. This is true, but this will come as a surprise for many students who might not have heard of this national park, Serra da Capivara in Brazil, where there are fantastic prehistoric paintings. And so students would have to do that, learning how to research new information. In the teacher's guide that accompanies Game Changer, there's always suggestions on how to implement these activities, the activities. And for this particular example, these are the suggestions. Ask students to raise their hands if they have ever entered a cave. If so, have they ever seen a prehistoric painting? Have students research on the internet if the statement is true or false. Remind students to check 2 or 3 websites to confirm their answer and to use reliable websites. See, this is a process of learning to learn. You have to learn responsibly, more than one site, reliable sites. Ask them then to research more about prehistoric caves around the world and have them share their findings. So you can do that. How can we create some group bonding with this? My feeling is that just sharing for sharing the findings will not necessarily create group bonding. If I go to the front of the class and say, okay, I researched about these cave paintings in Spain, they are in such place, they are, you know, their age is so and so, you can visit them this way or the other. This is not necessarily this won't necessarily create group bonding. You have to involve students with information. So what about asking students to come together with everything they have found out and creating, let's say, a collaborative document that everybody could share, and everybody could research and search for information. They could produce a wiki, for example, where they could, you know, constantly feed new information, new findings from research that they would have, right? So this would be a way of involving them in this group bonding. I'm aware I'm running out of time. I'll just skip, Katya, if you allow me. I'll skip to the final slides. I'm sorry about that. I think I got too excited about things. Maybe spent too much time. And I just want
Denise, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
We have time. You don't need to rush.
Okay.
So far, we don't have any questions, so we can use the most of our time.
Oh, you don't have any questions in the background?
No.
Oh, okay. So instead of going then back to, okay. Let me show, I have to make a decision here, isn't it? Let me show this slide here. If we think about helping students learn to learn about themselves as learners, they need to, like I said before, they need to be aware, they need to have a wide repertoire of ways of learning, isn't it? So I may prefer to learn in a particular way, but there are so many ways of learning. And if I am exposed to these other ways of learning, I may realize that I can learn in those different ways as well. Um, so there is this section in the book, which I particularly like. In Game Changer, every 2 units, at the end of every 2 units, there is a review section. And in the review section, there is this subsection called Learn to Learn, where students are presented with different strategies for learning, typically vocabulary. So these sections, they try to address different preferences. And notice that I'm not using the word styles because this is a word that we're not using anymore in academia. And this is a word that came, we're not talking about learning styles as a frozen thing anymore. We're talking about preferences now because preferences change, and something that, like I was saying, we can learn to learn in different ways. So we try to bring different strategies that address different preferences for learning. So for example, in a unit, we may suggest something that address those learners who like to learn visually, if you like. So the strategy would be a suggestion for drawing new vocabulary. In another unit, for example, we might have a suggestion for those students who like to write when they learn. So we suggest something like, writing examples, or if you like to think when you learn, to sort examples in groups and things like that. This one is a strategy that focuses very much on those who like to learn orally, either by listening or by speaking, but using oral skills, oral resources, if you like. So the strategy is the following: record yourself saying words you learned, then record yourself saying them in sentences, which is very important because then you have the word used in context. So words, the pronunciation of words may change depending on where in a sentence these words are, isn't it? And then we listen to the recordings every time you want to review the vocabulary. So this young lady, this teenager, records rainy, which is the vocabulary learned, and the sentence is, it's rainy today. So she records it, she listens to it when she wants to review the vocabulary. So there's obviously an element of technology here because the idea itself involves technology, isn't it? If we want to add some group bonding in this activity, we could do all sorts of things, isn't it? We could, for example, encourage students to sit together and listen to each other's recordings and give feedback on the recording. And we would need to teach students that feedback ideally should start with something very positive, isn't it? Oh, so you pronounce this bit very nicely, but this bit is not so accurate. How about, and then you give a suggestion, how about you do this and that. So again, if we do that, and if we group students in these revisions, we might help create this community of learners that we think it's so important. So now I think we have to go to the end. Just to wrap up, really, teaching learners to learn is no longer a choice, but a must. So that goes back to the example of my father, isn't it? That was something that happened spontaneously, him and so many other people, isn't it? But now it's no longer a choice, it's a must. We must support all our students to develop this skill to learn. So learning to learn is a skill, it's teachable, and it's learnable. And we teachers can learn to teach learning to learn, by knowing all these strategies, by providing students with this repertoire of possibilities. And because we are talking about teenagers, for things really to be effective, we need to involve them. We need to listen to them. We need to respect them. We need to involve them, ask them what they think, ask them to give suggestions. So trying to remember, the notions of support, group bonding, technology, music, and gaming is always a good idea. My advice for you, colleagues, teachers, is to have fun but learn as well in the process. Because if we believe that our students need to learn, we need to make sure we learn to learn all the time as well. Otherwise, it would be a contradiction, isn't it? So we have to be very open to learn all the time, forever, right? So that's it. This is all from me. In this slide, there is a link if you want to know more about Game Changer. And I think Katja can add this link in the chat box, perhaps. And in this final slide, if you want to get in touch with me, you'll find my email address, my website. I'm on social media. My social media is all professional, so you can find me in all these, the media that I have in this slide. And if you have any questions about, the book, do contact Cambridge, Brazil at atendimento.br@cambridge.org. And that's all for me, everyone. Thank you very much for being with us for the past hour. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very, very much. And do get in touch if you have any questions or comments.
Thanks a lot, Denise. In fact, one question popped up, and I would like to ask you from Elvis Campos. He asks, what are 3 issues teenagers want to learn about, in your opinion?
So what's the name of the person again?
Elvis.
Elvis. The 3 things teenagers want to learn about. Elvis, this is such a different question because teenagers, they are so different from each other, isn't it? In my experience as a teacher, I think teenagers were always interested in knowing about me as a person and about me as not only the teacher who was there in the classroom, but also a person who was an adult, but who was previously a teenager as well. So whenever I talked about conflicts or questions or funny things or silly things I did as a teenager, and also how these things developed and the consequences of these things. Sometimes you do some silly things and the consequences are not so good. Sometimes you do some things and the consequences are fantastic. I think they are interested in knowing about this development, but this interest doesn't come spontaneously. They don't take you for granted. They don't love you from the start. They don't want to know you about from the start. I think this bond is constructed, and you have to take the first step. You have to show interest in them so that they can show interest in you, back. 3 things, I don't know, it's life, isn't it? Everything that has to do with life, they are very interested. There are these more superficial elements, isn't it? Technology, like I said, technology, games and music, but everything that these things are all about identity, isn't it? It's about expression of identity. So everything that has to do with how to express yourself and to show your identity and to construct your identity, I think they are very, very much interested, because at the end of the day, they are trying to find out who they are. They are trying to understand, who is this person I'm becoming? I'm not a child anymore. I'm not an adult yet. I'm becoming somebody. Who am I? So issues of identity. So I think it's something they are very interested in.
Well done, Denise. It was excellent. Thanks for this very inspiring and informative session. I'm sure the participants have also enjoyed it a lot. I can see in the comments here. So thanks very much for your participation. Have a good weekend, everyone. And we see each other soon in the next Game Changer webinar. Thanks, Denise, once again.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.